used to love taking my family on camping trips. There was this specific set of campgrounds up in the Catskill Mountains that we used to visit as often as we could during the spring, summer, and fall. But that was ruined for us the last time we were there. At that time in our life, it was just me, my wife Kim, and our daughter Millie, and we couldn't have been more excited to get to our campsite. My plans were simple: set up tents, go on a hike, and then catch some fish for dinner. Sadly, there was a wrench thrown into the mix when I noticed that we weren't alone on the trail that led to the campgrounds that I used. This didn't happen often, but every now and then we would run into fellow hikers or campers, but there was something different about this guy. I don't know what it was, but as soon as I noticed him walking behind us on the trail, I decided to keep Millie and my wife very close to me, and I put myself between them and the man as we walked. After about an hour of hiking, we made it to the place where we were going to set up our tents, and I was happy to see that the man who was following us just kept on walking. As I set up our tents, I tried my best to convince myself that this guy was just a hiker and there was nothing to worry about. And honestly, by about halfway through the day, I had forgotten all about him. The sun started to go down and I began setting up s'mores for Kim and Millie when I could have sworn that I heard something walking around in the distance. I stopped what I was doing and looked around our campsite for a moment to make sure it was clear, and I didn't see anything, so I decided not to worry Kim about it. I finished making us our snacks and then we all continued having fun before bed. I stayed awake for about an hour past everyone just to make sure the fire was actually out and that all of our stuff was put away. But when it was time for me to go to sleep, boy did I pass out. I slept really well for about 20 minutes before I woke up to my wife poking me and whispering for me to wake up. I looked over at her and saw that she looked horrified, and then I looked past her to see that Millie was also awake. My wife caught my attention again and whispered that someone was in our camp. So I listened closely, and sure enough, I could hear someone moving around right outside of our tent. I told Kim to stay in the tent with Millie as I made my way out to see who or what was in our camp, and as soon as I popped my head through the entrance of the tent, I saw who it was. I recognized the man who was following us up the hiking trail earlier that day, and it looked like he was going through our cooler and all of the food that we had left out. Before I could say anything, he noticed me getting out of the tent and immediately dropped the food that he was holding. I tried to calmly ask him what he was doing, but before I could get a sentence out, he charged me and tackled me back toward the tent. We both fell onto the tent, causing my wife and daughter to both scream from inside of it, and I don't know if it was the sound of them screaming or the fact that he didn't mean to fall over with me, but the man was clearly startled after that and simply took off running in the opposite direction. I checked to make sure that Millie and Kim were all right before taking a flashlight and looking around for that guy. I couldn't find him, which means he must have run pretty far away from the camp, but we still didn't feel safe sleeping there. After I got back to our tent, we all decided to pack up, and in the middle of the night started walking back to our car. It was an hour-long hike through the dark woods to our vehicle, and every now and then I swear I heard someone walking behind us. Thankfully, the man never showed his face again, and we managed to make it back to the car without any incident. We made it home early the next morning, and I made sure to report the incident to the owner of the property that the hiking trail and campsite were located on. Sadly, that was our last trip to that campsite. None of us felt it was safe there anymore. Camping alone can be one of the most peaceful experiences of your life, but if you aren't prepared for anything and everything, it can be equally terrifying. I learned that when I was camping by myself in the Rocky Mountains. I had been out there for 2 days, but this time I brought enough provisions to last me the entire week, if not more. It's too bad I didn't even get the chance to use half of them before learning how truly treacherous the wilderness can be. It was the middle of the night on my second day there, and I was sleeping pretty well until I was woken up by the sudden sound of running water. As soon as I opened my eyes and became conscious, I could feel that I was laying in water that was about an inch deep and quickly rising. Even in my tired state, I could tell what was happening. I was caught in the middle of a flash flood, and it was coming in quickly. I knew my best chance of making it out of the situation would be to get out of my tent and then move to the side of the flowing water to hopefully get out of it without being swept away. Sadly, it was too late. As soon as I started to get up, I felt the bottom of the tent being lifted and swayed by the water that was rushing by. And by the time I unzipped the tent and poked my head out, it started to be pulled along with the rushing water. I tried to get my body out of the tent as it started to flip from the force of the water that was quickly rising, and I managed to step out and stand upright. By that point, the water level had risen to where it was just above my knee, and it seemed to be moving even faster now. I tried to make my way over to the edge of the rushing water, but the second I lifted 1 foot, the pull of the water forced me to topple over. I fell face first into the water and tried to get my footing again, but it was like fighting against rapids at that point. That's how fast flash flooding can happen. I guess that's why they call it flash flooding. Before I knew it, I was being swept away just like my tent was. I tried to relax my body and brace for any rocks that I might be smacked into as I followed the flow of the flood, and it helped for the most part. Anytime I came across a small rock, I just sort of rolled off the side of it with the water. That is until I thought the water was calming down. I thought I noticed myself slowing down and decided to try to swim to the side of the flood, but as soon as I did, my leg smacked into a branch or a rock underneath the water, which sent a shooting pain up my entire leg. I cried out in pain before I started trying to swim against the current again. Thankfully, I was right and the flood had been slowing down. I was able to make my way over to the side of the flood bank to land that was only soaked by the rain. I pulled myself out of the water and then tried to get myself far away from the flood in case it spread out further. As soon as I thought it was safe enough to lie down, I did. I needed to take a break and breathe as I figured out what had just happened to me. I was pretty upset with myself for not checking the weather for that week, but ultimately figured that all I could do was make it out of that forest alive. I tried to get up and walk, but my ankle was clearly busted from whatever I had hit under the water, so I couldn't really put much weight on it. I managed to hobble very slowly through the woods until daylight. When I could finally see my surroundings, I could tell that I was heading in the right direction and continued to slowly make my way back to my car. I had to take frequent breaks because of my ankle, but I knew that if I didn't make it out of the woods that night, I might not have made it out at all. It wasn't until almost sundown on the day after the flash flood that I finally found the trail that I had used to get to my campsite. It took me another half hour to get back to my car, and when I did, the first place I went to was the hospital. From there, I was able to call my family and let them know what happened to me and that I was fine. But that was the last time I went camping on my own. I never really was a camping type of person, but my cousins wanted me to go camping for their 19th birthday and I couldn't turn it down. They decided to bring me to a campsite that they had apparently been going to for years. But there were a few red flags for me on the trail. The main fact being that the trail passed through an old campsite that was all torn apart. It looked like a crazy animal had gotten a hold of the tent and everything or everyone inside. But according to my cousins, the tent had been there for years. They said that no one cleaned it up in honor of a camper who had died there, but I thought there was something strange about that. It sort of felt like they were just making that up to keep my nerves from going insane. We continued walking through the woods until we eventually hit a point where I could see a fire pit that had been set up. My cousin said that this was their campsite, and we began setting up for the night. I was the last one to get his tent finished, but by that point, my cousin Marcus had already started the fire, so I was able to just chill. The sun quickly set, and before we knew it, we couldn't see anything around us. All that was visible were the three of us and the fire that sat between us as we talked about old family reunions and parties. It started to get pretty fun if I'm being honest, but that all went away the moment we heard that scream. We all fell silent as the sound of someone screaming at the top of their lungs began coming from the woods. I looked at Marcus and asked him what was going on. He said he wasn't sure, and we all continued to listen. My eyes grew wide as I heard the scream again. There were no words, just a loud, blood-curdling scream. We all looked at each other as if none of us knew what we should do. I grabbed my flashlight and started shining it around us as the screaming continued. I began to panic as it started to get louder and louder, as if it was heading right toward us. Then out of nowhere, the screaming faded, but it wasn't followed by silence. I'll never forget the feeling in my bones when I heard the unmistakable sound of an animal growling in the distance. I continued to frantically shine my light around, and my cousins joined in, but no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't find anything despite it sounding as if it was right on top of us. After about 20 minutes, all of the noises started to fade away, but still no sign of the animal that was the cause of it. My cousins and I sat around the fire for the rest of the night in a panicked state, looking around as if something was going to jump out of the woods and grab us. Hours passed, but they seemed like days, and when the sun finally started to shine in the sky, we all couldn't wait to get out of there. We quickly packed our things and started walking back down that trail. Each of us moved slowly as we were all looking around, expecting to see signs of whatever we had heard that night, but there was nothing at all. We made it back to the car and then drove back into town to grab something to eat at the diner. And while we were making small talk with our waitress, we explained to her what had just happened to us, and she told us that her son used to go camping up there and once told her the same exact story. We never did figure out what we were hearing that night, but that was the last time I ever went camping. No one would ever convince me to go again.